we got the red box with the little ticker. So that means we're live. So hello everybody watching live or watching afterwards. I am Jacob. Well, I go by Jacob Winograd now. I need to actually update my StreamYard thing to say Jacob Winograd so people stop calling me Daniel, because it's not my name. But so my name is Jacob Daniel Winograd. I am the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast, part of the Christians for Liberty Network with the Libertarian Christian Institute. And I'm also a honorary host of the Pennsylvania Mises Caucus podcast, even though I don't think I've hosted an episode in probably 6 months or so. But I like to still pretend I have that title, because why not?
It's been a little while.
It's been a little while, right? So we're actually multicasting to my YouTube channel and to the Mises Caucus Pennsylvania channel here on the week of Thanksgiving. I'm here joined by the, not really my co-host, by the usual host of the Mises Caucus Pennsylvania podcast, and also by our good friends James Jenneman over in Minnesota. And we're just here tonight to have a conversation about Thanksgiving and why the Puritans were right and Catholicism is the source of all things evil. And no, I'm kidding. We're going to talk about, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, we're talking about religious freedom here in America. And so we'll be talking, it'll be casual conversation. We'll be getting into the Pilgrims and the Puritans, and also here in Pennsylvania, it's especially relevant. We have the Amish and the Mennonite, and it'll be a smorgasbord of all the different American flavors of America, religious freedom and things like that. So thank you for joining us. If you are joining us tonight, I'm going to start off by pitching it to James, who can introduce himself a little bit if he wants, and then the floor will be yours. You can, take us wherever you want to take us.
Oh man, I don't like that invitation. I'll take you anywhere.
I left that
anywhere my weird random brain will go.
That is the worst setup, by the way. Usually in podcasting, you try to ask a question that is a soft pitch. I just basically threw the ball high up in the air and said, "Somebody catch it." So no pressure,
Oh,
James.
Man.
Yeah, well, James, if I may, well, this is your first. No, go ahead.
All right, I will. I think we might be delayed. Actually, I'm even delaying on my own picture, so that's going to be real fun for the next hour. Let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm James, retired podcaster, blog post starter, Twitter user sometimes. What else? Oh, I'm a lapsed member of LPPA. I've been to 2 of y'all's conventions, Mises OG, and just kind of an all around fun guy. What else? What am I here for? So I wanted to talk about the Pilgrims and Yankees and how much they suck. And Jacob, I think you were going to talk about something. Calvin, you wanted to talk about Mennonites, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well,
so we'll be getting into all that good stuff later on.
I think if you're pitching it to me, what I want to do is maybe just let's celebrate Thanksgiving. Why don't we just kind of say what we're thankful for? Kill a little bit of time, and also just sort of remember that the reason for Thanksgiving doesn't really matter what the origins were, but what we're celebrating today, in my opinion. So, Jacob, do you want to go first with that? I know you've got a lot going on this year.
Yeah, I got a lot that I could be thankful for. I mean, it's wow. I mean, I'm actually almost to the day a year into my new position with the Libertarian Christian Institute, and that's been awesome. So I'm especially thankful for that. I am thankful that my family is healthy. Last year, my wife was going through some health problems, and she's got a clean bill of health now. And yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for what's going on in my life in terms of, just I wouldn't say we don't have problems. I mean, we got 4 young kids, and it can be a little bit tough balancing all those different things. But I don't know. I feel incredibly blessed where I'm at in life right now. Work's going well. Home life's going well. Podcast stuff's going well. Plugged in with a good church, so yeah, I'd say that's a good list of things that I'm thankful for right now.
That's cool. I started
talking with you guys tonight here, of course. That's the highlight of my week.
Yeah.
Well, I am glad everything's going well with you now, Jacob. I know that was a hard going for a little while.
Yeah, no, I mean, I went back to back with my dad almost dying, and then my wife being in and out of the hospital for a while. So it was a rough 2-year patch. But so knock on the fake wood of the desk that I'm sitting in front of. It's everyone's healthy right now.
Knock on
Yes,
particle
I am
board.
I am a superstitious Calvinist.
Oh man.
And that's my role here tonight, by the way. I'm just the token Calvinist who's here to tell you you're all wrong when you guys are talking about stuff. So.
Oh man, every time I hear Calvinist, I don't know what to think because I'm indirectly named after John Calvin, and I don't believe in predestination. Yeah, that's a whole story. I was named after my grandfather, who was named after the president when he was born, who I believe himself was named after John Calvin. So there you go.
Wow. Wow. That'd be Coolidge, I assume?
Yes, that would be cool.
That's kind of a dumb question, really. How many presidents named Calvin are there?
Yeah. So all that to say, oh, do you want to go next?
No, you go next, man.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I introduced myself since I think this is my first time on Biblical Anarchy. So yes, I am Calvin Minjone. I am Jacob's former co-host, I guess you could say, on the Take Human Action podcast for the Mises Caucus over at the Libertarian Party, Pennsylvania. I'm one of the organizers over there, and I'm involved with a lot of the issue coalition projects and some of the candidate initiatives that we've got going on in Pennsylvania and nationwide. So that's a lot of my focus in addition to doing this podcast. As far as what I'm thankful for, So I think I am thankful for my, not just my health, but the health of everyone in my life, because we've had a lot of crazy health scares with, not just pandemics, but a surge in other issues. And, however severe things might have been with the pandemic itself, there's certainly a lot of after effects from it that have created ripple effects, like isolation of senior citizens, leading to things happening with them as far as social isolation, leading to dementia. There's just been like depression. There's been so many mental health crises that are still going under the radar with everything that happened surrounding the pandemic. And I'm finally glad that those issues are starting to be addressed and tackled more. So I'm thankful for that.
Sweet.
Awesome.
I'm glad everybody's back in good health. I've never had a health scare. Like, not extra hard on the fake wood.
Consider yourself lucky.
Yeah, and my dad got sick back in 2012, but he's fine now. So I'm just kind of waiting. I'm about to turn 41, which is, once you're in your 40s, it's kind of downhill from there, from what I understand. So we'll see. I'm thankful for a bunch. My partner and I are like a month and a week shy of our 5th anniversary, and that's really cool. Like 5 years is kind of a long time, especially like in non-married years, that kind of thing. So I'm glad that we're still together, so and going strong. His family has kind of adopted me, given that I'm not from Minnesota originally, so I don't have much family up here, and no family that I'm in contact with, really. So I get to go celebrate Thanksgiving with his huge extended family, and that's gonna be a ton of fun. It always is every year. And what else? I'm thankful for babies. My sister had a baby, and 2 of my partner's sisters. One of them just had a baby like last week, and the other one's pregnant and due in February. And I'm super, super happy about that because, propagation of the species and all that, and also propagation by good people, which is awesome. Hey, JC. Oh my God, JC follows me around the internet. Jesus, I don't even know who that guy is.
I just
sorry.
know he's always happy to see you.
Yeah, I know. It's great. It's been a long time too. My aforementioned retirement from podcasting. It's been what, like a year and a half, 2 years. So I don't catch these live streams and stuff very often anymore. I'm glad to see he's still around. He, assuming he's a he. I don't even know. Um, what else? What else am I thankful for? I'm also thankful. This is a weird thing to be thankful for, and it might. This might be because I don't have a family that I'm paying attention to, but I'm thankful for little things like, I don't know, like Elon Musk buying Twitter, for instance. That's a huge white pill to me. He just filed a lawsuit against the enemy of the people at Media Matters, and that's awesome. Like, the more of these little lawsuits and just like really kind of Return to the Jedi type stuff going on, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Um, I'm really feeling my populist tendencies coming out this year, and I can only feel that getting stronger. So that's good. And what else? I'm thankful for y'all. I'm especially thankful. I'm thankful for my hometown community here in Minnesota, the Mises Caucus and the well wishers and fellow travelers and things like that in LPMN and outside the party as well. But you guys in Pennsylvania took me in and adopted me, and that was great too. So there's that. I should plug. I'm the convention committee chair for the LPMN convention coming up in April. Our chair resigned, and so I got kind of landed in the position, which is kind of exciting. Hope to see people turn out. Although we're not trying to pack the house or anything like that, but we're gonna have a pretty cool party on Friday night. So hoping to see a few people that'll travel out for us. That's all.
Awesome. Cool.
Great.
We all got a lot to be thankful for. I don't know, Calvin or James, who wants to go first here. I know, James, you said you wanted to talk about, interested in talking about the Pilgrims. I've been listening to, in preparation for this, I've been listening in the background while I work a bunch of podcasts on Puritans and Pilgrims, and I also listened to some stuff on Jamestown and stuff like that, and reminding, and the one I listened to today was actually funny. It was about Jamestown and the story of Pocahontas, which I feel like I must have learned at some point, but I actually didn't realize that, like, yeah, spoiler alert, the movie is not a documentary.
Oh yeah, it's so different from the Disney version.
I never saw the movie. That movie came out when I was probably in 8th grade or maybe a freshman in high school or something like that. And so it was kind of like in the between times when you're too old to watch cartoons and also too young to watch cartoons when they become cool again when you're an adult.
When you're kids, you're never too old to watch cartoons.
Exactly. Well, I mean, when you're 14, that's unless you're a sheltered little Calvinist, you probably are watching Disney movies all through high school. Not me though, man. We were renting Porky's and shit. Sorry, I know you don't like me to swear on your podcast, Jacob. Sorry. But I think the last Disney movie I saw as a kid was Lion King, and then after that, everything after Lion King is kind of nouveau Disney. So Pocahontas and Tarzan and Hunchback and all them, I've never seen them. Anyway, I don't know anything about Pocahontas, the real story or the fake story. I know this. I know that the story of the Pilgrims in Plymouth Rock has a very outsized place in the American historical and cultural psyche than does Jamestown and any of the other sort of stories that come out of the South. And I will say this: everything that I know about this comes from the Abbeville Institute and ChatGPT. So the knowledge that I have didn't come from like a unbiased history book or anything like that. But it seems to me that the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. They were going to die, and then they didn't die because the Indians taught them how to make their own food, which is kind of cool. That's got some like libertarian / agorist roots. The Pilgrims too. I mean, I can't shit on the Pilgrims too much. I don't want to poop on the Pilgrims too much. Sorry. Because they were fleeing religious oppression, and they came here as a separatist sect, I don't necessarily like that they were trying to flee, more traditional forms of Christianity, because to me that is like what Christianity is, and the sort of puritanical or Puritan offshoots of the church that had existed for 1600 years. It's just more and more and more and more and more man-made, uh, denominations and whatnot. I wish Jacob hadn't gotten up. I was kind of saying that for his benefit.
Well,
But
my understanding was that the reason the Pilgrims were having a hard time and having a famine in the first place was because, at least at the beginning, they were basically practicing like communism. They were sharing everything. They're sharing all the lands. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. But again, like our sources are all libertarians and conservatives and things like that. So it's possible that there's nuances that the historians that we listen to don't cover. And I think that's probably in the ballpark of accurate anyway. So what else? I mean, the Wampanoag, or however you say it, Indian tribe kind of saved the Pilgrims' bacon. They had their little harvest celebration, which we consider the first Thanksgiving, although it has been pointed out that the real first Thanksgiving was in Virginia. It was more like an English Thanksgiving, so rather than like a harvest festival, it was more of a day of prayer and like actual like giving of thanks to God rather than celebration like the holiday became. Something really interesting though is that, and obviously this is probably common knowledge, but Thanksgiving didn't really become an official holiday. So FDR was the one who like named it a national holiday. Lincoln was the first president who declared a day of thanks nationwide, or so-called nationwide. Prior to that, it was a very decentralized holiday. Started out obviously in New England, kind of trickled its way down to it actually hit Tennessee and Louisiana early on. I don't really know the backstory of that, but really what was happening was the governors of these states would just declare a day of thanks, and there was no like set day. Today it's the last day in the last Thursday in November. Jeez. But back then it was just sort of like whenever they declared it, which was convenient for Americans who had kind of expanded westward. So if I'm in New Hampshire and you're in Pennsylvania or whatever, and we're cousins, and you travel to Pennsylvania or whatever, since the holidays were staggered, then you would be able to come to me, or I would be able to come to you, or or we could go to each other or whatever, and have two Thanksgivings, that's kind of cool, I guess. And also, it speaks to the benefits of decentralization, which I know as Misesians we like.
Always.
Interestingly, it expanded west. It was I think it was a holiday in Oregon before it was a holiday in Iowa. Although Minnesota was celebrating it fairly early, St. Paul had one of the first Thanksgivings, and the reason for that, this is pretty interesting. The people in St. Paul wanted to be like high society socialites, like in Chicago, and so they threw this huge like ballroom, like formal Thanksgiving with chandeliers and piano music and all the stuff that you don't really think of when you think of that time period. It wasn't just like these rugged farmers. It was actually like high society people that were celebrating this holiday, specifically in St. Paul, Minnesota. But it was very controversial in the South. It was very much considered a Yankee holiday. I would recommend going and listening to Brian McClanahan's episode. He did it probably a year ago today, or right around a year ago, and basically was kind of talking about how it started out as a Yankee holiday and it was super pushed back against by the South. The governor of Virginia, in fact, was opposed to declaring a day of Thanksgiving because, in keeping with his predecessor, Thomas Jefferson, he wanted to maintain a separation between church and state. And since in Virginia at the time, the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians, like Jacob, were kind of vying for cultural power there, and the government wanted to stay completely out of it, which is, Well, maybe you do. Maybe people do think of America as a like always secular society, but we haven't always been. That's not the case. Like, these people were celebrating Thanksgiving not because they were giving thanks to one another. They were giving thanks to God, like the Christian God. And so it's very interesting to me that this non-denominational or nominally non-denominational governor, I don't know which sect, if any, he belonged to, in order to keep the peace, refused to declare a day of Thanksgiving in Virginia. What were some other fun facts that I heard? Well, so the other thing, and as libertarians, this is something that we kind of have to grapple with. Actually, it's the reason that it was so opposed in the South was because it was seen as an abolitionist holiday. Because in New England specifically, not necessarily even much farther south in the sort of so-called northern states, but in New England specifically, the culture was abolitionist, and it wasn't just political. Because especially in New England, where the Puritans lived, and still to this day, the political and the religious or moral or whatever, and in today's society, I mean, everybody kind of agrees at this point that wokeness and the sort of cultural leftism is pretty identical to Puritanism without the God and Jesus part. But they're highly moralist. They definitely combine their deeply held ethical and moral beliefs with their politics, and want to impose that on other people. Similarly, the Puritans did the same thing. I mean, that's why we have the word puritanical. It really does refer to somebody who imposes their beliefs on somebody, and if they're having too much fun, as the saying goes, then they need to be stopped.
There's an interesting dichotomy there between, like, you have because people, I think, just use the word Puritan to describe anyone who had that particular religious sort of like Calvinist bend, but really the people who came to America were more, I think it's better to label them as like the separatists, because the Puritans, I think it's more accurate, like those who were staying in like places like Britain and trying to like reform the state and reform the church and like say it had to be in their particular way. Like they were kind of like, they might fit that stereotype of like they're forcing their beliefs on everyone else, but at least the Pilgrims and the Puritans that came to that landed on Plymouth Rock, I don't know if that quite. I mean, they like internally, they were very
and that's what I mean,
puritanical,
because
they weren't like going around and like finger wagging the natives and things like that, trying to enforce.
Well, and they don't do that today either. I mean, look how the modern day Puritans treat immigrants and racial minorities. It's the soft bigotry of low expectations now. Maybe when they were interacting with the Indian tribes, they were more just minding their own business. At this point, it's not minding their own business. It's how can I coddle this person, or not even coddle, but how can I enable this person?
Well, back then they actually viewed it as like a holy mission, from what I was like listening to and reading.
Yeah,
like they were kind of like, well, we don't want to like. They at least like in my mind they weren't putting the cart before the horse. Like some Christians who have that kind of like puritanical spirit are kind of like. They don't care if people believe in the Bible or not. They're like, you need to behave this certain way. Whereas I think the Puritans, at least, that came to America were kind of like, well, no, we'll be able to preach the news of the gospel, and then people will have their lives transformed, and then we'll, force them to live the way that we live. There were a few examples of that. Like I know certain of the natives that they interacted with eventually came to believe in Christianity and things like that, and so they view that as an opportunity to bring the gospel to an area where it wasn't, which at least at the beginning didn't go terribly. I mean, I think as you go 50, 100 years later, then you start having more problems. But
and certainly as separatists, they had to get their own house in order first. There's no way they weren't missionaries, for instance. They were, I mean, when the Jesuits hit South America, they were there to spread the gospel, not build a new community. Whereas the separatists or the Pilgrims obviously were. I mean, that's why they're called pilgrims and not missionaries. I mean, when you think about it, what's a pilgrimage? It's a religious journey. It's not like a place where you're going to spread the word. You're going to receive the word, really. But the upshot here, though, is that So in New England, the Ivy League schools and things like that were founded very early on. You've got Harvard and especially Yale, and all of the sort of professional class in America was being groomed in Connecticut and Massachusetts to a lesser extent, and that sort of thing. And so even in the South, all the like writers and editors and lawyers and doctors and engineers and whoever else, they were all educated in New England. And so this mentality of well, it's the same mentality that led to making abolition not just a legal thing, but also a religious thing. It was brought south, and especially the holiday of Thanksgiving, and that's kind of how it was spread. This one woman, and I can't remember her name, she wrote a book, or maybe it was a series of books, I don't remember. They were all like Thanksgiving stories, and she was trying to get every governor in the country to declare Thanksgiving on a certain day. I think it was actually the last Thursday in November where it ended up being. And she was sort of like an evangelist for the holiday, which I don't really know what her motives were other than possibly spreading Yankeeism. And for all its faults, it did give us the abolition of slavery. I don't know that the Civil War was necessarily the best way to do away with it, but that's what I'm saying we have to grapple with, is this sort of authoritarian mindset that not only must every governor declare this day of Thanksgiving, but they must do it on this particular day, and eventually the president has to do it, and we have to make this a completely centralized top-down thing rather than something that springs up organically from local churches and that sort of thing. So we got this kind of terrible centralization, which is, it's not terrible that there's a holiday, obviously, like we all love Thanksgiving, but it is terrible that among everything else was centralized. And it's kind of like a Trojan horse, it's just a holiday. Yeah, but it's also just a war on drugs, and it's also just a military industrial complex, and it's also just Social Security and everything else that springs from this need to centralize everything. I'm gonna stop talking because we've been going for.
Thanksgiving is the slippery slope that brings us to.
It is, but it really is. Yeah. You're joking, and it's funny, but it's true. Like these little things where they wanted to centralize culture turned into the centralization of politics. And when you think about it as in sort of like an anthropological sense, I guess this kind of strict communitarian religious environment, whether it's the hierarchy of the Presbyterian Church or the congregationalism that was more common in New England, these insular societies that, like, Jacob, you probably go to a congregational church if I had to guess. But you're not living in that community all the freaking time. You go to work, from Monday through Friday. You're not being watched, and you're not being held accountable to every single little peccadillo. And you're certainly not, I saw Goody Taylor out in the forest doing witchcraft. And that kind of society is tough to maintain. And I think that is a big part of why New England has gone completely secular. It started out as this very hyper-religious society, and then they started to couch their social programs like abolition, not abolition, well, abolition for sure, but the temperance movement and the women's liberation movement and all the different sort of progressive era movements that led to prohibition and things like that. All of that stuff was couched in this kind of Yankee religious language. The temperance movement that gave us prohibition was not like a political thing for the most part. It was, wives who wanted their husbands to stop drinking because, they were leading to immoral cultures and things like that. So what do you get?
Well, go ahead. Finish your thought.
So the upshot obviously is, what do you get? You get prohibition, you get the mafia, and then after prohibition, they've got to justify the continued existence of the FBI. So they create the war on drugs and everything else that we have today, because that the government's never going to abolish a program that they start, and all of that started because of these damn Yankees. The end.
So would you with the end? So would you say the experiment went wrong when it no longer became focused on the local community and decentralization, and became more about trying to spread some kind of universal culture, universal national identity or language?
Yeah.
Because like,
well,
I look at the early, because like when you look at the early experimentation in organizing a community that the Pilgrims went through, there's a lot there that I think is like really interesting and good. Like, I mean, and even that matches up with like, our libertarian ideas. Like they quickly found out that like when they implemented ideas that were more social, I mean, obviously like the terms socialism and communism didn't exist, but like when like Jamestown had this problem, and then so did the Pilgrims, when they first started to like, get down to brass tacks and organize their community, when they tried doing things in this more like collective way or like communal way, or everyone just kind of there were problems with a lot of people freeloading and not doing anything. That's where, like in Jamestown, you had they started using actual scripture to enforce, like, if you don't work, you don't eat. They had to do that because people were more focused on trying to strike it rich, chasing after gold and things like that. They didn't have quite the same problem up north, but they still did. You see, if you look into their history, they eventually, both settlements, like Jamestown and the Pilgrims, had to figure out how to they had to incorporate basically a system of based on private property rights and like incentivizing people to actually work, to actually have a functioning community and that was flourishing and things like that. So like there's things there that I think are really interesting to watch, kind of like, and you can analyze it from a religious angle, from a political angle, from a sociological level. And I think that's good, but yeah, it is interesting. Like then you fast forward to now, and it's like, I don't know, where does the point in the road where, things went off the rails? But the initial roots of it, in terms of seeking, religious freedom, and at least in part, it looked like calling them separatists. I mean, to me, that's kind of like modern, that maps onto like the modern idea of if you don't like where you're living, instead of trying to force your way of life on everyone else, go make your way of life somewhere else and do it peacefully. And they more or less did that. At least if you look at that narrow time window.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. My gripe, I guess, is with the spreading of that political authority, and we can consider the pasture of these communities as the political authority for all intents and purposes. I think that's probably safe to say. Political authority, we all know as libertarians that it's problematic and that sort of thing. But the more local you get, the more like authoritarian, I guess, you can get away with being. Jacob, last time you and I talked, we talked about how parents can be far stricter than legislatures, even to the point where they're violating human rights. I mean, if the legislature says you can't smoke weed, well, that's my body. I can do whatever the hell I want with it. But if I'm living in my dad's house and he says I can't smoke weed, well, he's got a little bit more. He got a little bit more leeway as to what he can tell me to do. And I think that and this is completely, there's no like hard and fast like rule as to what's allowed at what level of political authority or whatever. But at some point at the local level, it's okay. It's a little bit more okay for the sort of like cultural norms and mores to hold more sway over the populace. But the farther out you go, the more problematic that gets. And we're seeing it, like, obviously today. That's why there's so many divisions and cultural strife and things like that.
Yeah. What's really funny about
It's been happening since. Well, it's been happening. It's been happening, especially since the progressive era, which I maintain that the progressive era, it didn't like end because progressivism was rejected. It ended because progressivism became the default, and there's no like movement anymore. It's just what happened.
Yep.
But it all kind of started. So I was talking earlier, Jacob, while you were away. It started a little bit because people from Yale and Harvard and so forth were kind of trickling out into the rest of the continent and infecting people with their woke cancer, or alternatively, using their education to build up new societies as the lawyers and the engineers and the editors and that kind of thing. Depending on what angle you look at it from. I mean, education is a good thing. It's not like going to Yale is inherently a bad thing. But
Today it might be.
the Yales and the Yales and the Harvards of the world are the ones that pump out the ruling class. And when they're pumping out the ruling class with this particular, indoctrination in mind, this particular Yankee mindset in mind, when they go down to Tennessee or Mississippi or whatever, it's either not well received or it's well received by some people and not by others, which is even worse. Because then you get, internal warring, which we're seeing now. And you saw back then a little bit until the actual, war between the states, when those things were a little, when things became a little bit more cohesive sectionally, because well, I guess it's kind of like the Jonathan Haidt thing that he says a lot, me against my brother, me and my brother against our cousins, me, my brother, and our cousins against the world. That again with the localism, the more local you get, the closer the ties are as well. So anyway, after the Civil War was Reconstruction, as we know, and Reconstruction ruined everything. Reconstruction is the reason that I, growing up in Texas, know almost nothing about Jamestown, but I know everything about the Pilgrims. We learned all about that shit, but we didn't learn a thing about what was happening in the South at this time, because the South, where we lived, was evil. It was backwards. It was, completely overrun by slavery. It was, hicks and rednecks and hillbillies and irredeemable. And it just needed, and this is what we're learning in Texas. I have no idea what you guys were learning in Pennsylvania. Holy cow. I know that there's a reason that when here in Minnesota, if I tell somebody, oh yeah, I grew up in Texas, more often than not, the response is, oh, I'm so sorry. As if like I was, raised backwards or something like that. And it's because of the indoctrination that we get as kids. Like even in the South, we were getting that same indoctrination. Texas is a little bit different because in Texas in seventh grade, you have to learn Texas history. And there's a sense of like, I guess patriotism or a bit of jingoism to Texas. Yeah. Whereas, in other places, there's not a whole lot of like Alabama pride. I mean, Alabamans love their college football, Crimson Tide or whatever. But other than that, you don't see a lot of. I don't know what the Alabama flag looks like. Do you?
Doesn't the Alabama flag look somewhat like a knockoff Confederate flag? I might be wrong. I know one of the
state flags did. Yeah,
I think they all did.
I thought it might have been South Carolina.
Let me look this up. Alabama.
Oh no, Alabama is just a big red X.
Oh yeah, it's just a big red X. Yeah. What's the? I don't know. We could look it up later. No, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, I think this everything you were just saying reminds me of what I recently started listening to the Martyr Made podcast with Daryl Cooper, because like Scott Horton and Dave Smith.
I've got to start listening to that.
I was about to start that myself. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's do it. Like it is really good, and it is like I've studied that era of history before, but he goes. I mean, he's like another Scott Horton. Like the footnotes and the citations and the primary sources are just like off the wall. Like I might have to listen to it again because I feel like I'm not absorbing it all. But he did make this one point when he was talking about the makeup of like the Arab population, kind of like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he started talking about why states exist and comparing it to like what anarchists want. And he was like, well, and he basically described what you said, James, but he did kind of describe it in like in a way that almost felt like he was criticizing it. He was like, "Listen, like you anarchists complain about the state because you give up all these, this like you can't just do whatever you want, but you don't realize like listen, the Arabs kind of lived in like an anarchy, but like down at like that most local level, it was incredibly totalitarian. So like you really didn't have freedom to do what you want, and so there is something to." I don't entirely. I see what he's saying because it's kind of based on what you're saying, but I guess it comes down to trade-offs, right? It's kind of like, well, what do you want?
Yeah.
Do you want a society where you can have all these, like, I guess you could call them like individual or like civil liberties and have the maximum out of them, where like you can go out and party, go out and drink, go be as promiscuous as you want, and do all this and not have any consequences. Like you can mouth off. He was talking about how like an Arab, like an Arab society back then, like if you just like went out into like the public square or something and like said the wrong thing to the wrong person, you could set off a blood feud and have families warring with each other for generations, and that's why they were so controlling of each other. And it's like, okay, I understand where people look at that and like. It's like Hatfield and McCoy's, and it's like, okay, maybe we don't want that. But then, like, compared to what, right? It's like, if I don't think it's a false dichotomy between that extreme and this other extreme, but if it was, it's an interesting dichotomy to think about. Like, the polar opposite of that is what we have now. It's the American Empire. It's like, great, here's all your civil liberties. Also, we created this giant Leviathan that's dominant over the entire world and is, contributing to the slaughtering of hundreds of thousands of people every year. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like we have to do an honest analysis of the trade-offs here, and like maybe it's like maybe the problem with what Daryl Cooper was talking about there. And again, I think nothing against Daryl Cooper. Love the guy, love his podcast. He great historian, does a great job of arguing. For a lot of like the anti-war positions that I agree with, but where I think he might have been off base a little bit in his analysis here, and I have to be careful when I say this because I'm going to sound like a freaking neocon, which I hate. But it's like maybe the problem is like anarchy with any culture isn't good, but if you have the right cultural norms and you have that decentralized model, it's going to work better. Like maybe having those. Christian moral norms. Like heck, even though I'm not Catholic, if I had a choice between the status quo and living in a decentralized, polycentric, legal order society that's essentially anarchist, but like the prevailing, cultural dominance at the local level with your Catholic Church, I'd press that button all day long, even though I'm a filthy Protestant. So, you know what I mean? It's like I'd rather have to deal with local authoritarianism from my Catholic bishop than this giant tyrannical war machine that we've constructed. So I don't know. I mean, we're going a little bit off topic, but it does connect to like why we're going from the Pilgrims are the founding of people of like the West settling over here, and we somehow got from that to this, and there's just a big disconnect.
That's that thing you just said. The Pilgrims are the founding whatever of the West. Like that's the indoctrination that we get as kids. We think of Plymouth as like the founding story of the continental Americans, when in reality Jamestown was first. Virginia was before Massachusetts. The South was before the North. But we as Americans, as everyone in America is on the losing side of the Civil War, if you really want to put it that way. We have been indoctrinated with this Yankee, Northern New England specifically, fake history. And that's my issue with these Thanksgiving origin myths and things like that. It's why I mentioned the story of the true first Thanksgiving, which took place a few years before the Pilgrims' Thanksgiving. And yeah, again, it was just a day of worship. It wasn't a day of feasting and partying, but it happened first, and it happened in Virginia, not in Massachusetts. And I mean, talking like this makes me like. I'm a little bit uncomfortable being as like pro South and anti North as I am, just given the implications of that, I feel the need to like disclaim my antipathy for slavery, which, you know, obviously I hate slavery. I'm a libertarian. And like as kind of far afield as I've been going lately, there's no way that slavery would ever be like part of my like my allowable practices in any sort of ideology that I end up picking up. Um, and when I talk about Yankees, I don't mean like every single thing that they believed was bad and every single practice that took place in the South was good. You know, Calvin, do you want to
Yeah.
pick it up with anything? Talk about the Mennonites,
Yeah.
man.
I will just add one thing a couple quick things to that real quick. So, hope Jacob comes back.
As
But
Jacob bails on us.
he's bailing on us. Okay, so as I've mentioned on the Take Human Action podcast before, I am also one of the main content producers for the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania page. So please follow us at lppa.org to check out the content that we have. And I'm going to be doing a post next week about the nullification crisis with South Carolina that'll actually talk about a lot of the North versus South issues that you're talking about now. So I did do a lot of digging on that.
Nice.
Short version, there is a way that you can, give a good hearing to the positions of the South without going down the whole like they were right about everything. Because in reality, no one's right about everything.
Yeah. You know who's real good on that is CJ Kilmer of Dangerous History.
Oh yeah.
He threads that needle really well. Like, you know, he'll, unlike a lot of right libertarians, like he'll freely admit, yeah, the Civil War was about slavery. Whereas and not only was the Civil War about slavery, but you know, Lincoln was anti-slavery and the secession movements were largely about slavery. Like he has no problem recognizing that and pointing it out. But also, you know, he understands all the flaws in the Northern program. So he's a great one to follow and to listen to on that if you need more research, I guess.
Right. So, as a transition point, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind with the Pilgrims is that, if I remember correctly, the Mayflower was actually trying to go to Jamestown, but they were blown off course, and that's how they ended up at Plymouth Rock. So I wonder how things would have been different if they had actually landed at Jamestown, and how they would have got along with the colonists over there that were just pursuing wealth and not religion at all. So that's kind of crazy to think about. But to go to the Mennonites, so we're going to go back in time a little bit to then fast forward to later American colonization. But for a little bit of background, so as everybody knows, at least who's a listener of Biblical Anarchy, I would assume you know, the Protestant Reformation came about with Martin Luther in the 1500s, and that eventually brought about several denominations of Protestantism, ones that are recognizable today, Lutheranism, Presbyterians, Calvinists, and of course Anabaptists, which at least in the American context, and I believe other contexts as well, would be known as Mennonites. And for those of you who are thinking Amish, Pennsylvania, since we'll be talking about Pennsylvania in a minute, yes, Amish were also Anabaptists, and originally they were Mennonites, but there was a split in the 1800s where some Mennonites became the Mennonites we know today, that follow a lot of the same beliefs as the original Anabaptists and Mennonites at that time, but they did not follow the whole "we're not going to adopt any modern technology" thing. But they still kept a lot of the same beliefs, whereas the Amish did not adopt any more technologies after a certain point, while maintaining the strict Anabaptist Mennonite beliefs. So I haven't dug too much into that split because that happened after the time period that I'm going to talk about. But I was curious about that, and that's my understanding of it. Seeing as I grew up around the Amish, I was curious about that. No, go ahead.
Were the Shakers Mennonites? Do you know?
I don't know too much about the Shakers either. Where are they found typically?
I don't know where they're from. I think they're from up in your neck of the woods. I for some reason I put them in the same camp as the Quakers. Maybe they were an offshoot of the Quakers. Actually, come to think of it,
that would make sense because
they didn't believe in sex at all. Like even in marriage. So obviously, like they died out pretty quick because they weren't actually breeding. Yeah. It was very, very strange sex. But that song, "Simple Gifts," is a Shaker working song. I guess they would sing it when they were playing working in the fields. So that's like the one cultural artifact that they've given us. I'm not gonna hum it because I'm a little hoarse right now. But if you just Google "Simple Gifts," you'll recognize the song. It's a great song.
All right. So one thing I'm going to try to do, since Jacob's not here, I guess I can commandeer this. He's going to miss out. I have a little bit of a presentation that I can share. I have pictures. So feel free. Like, I know a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in a minute is that's how I know so much about it. It's my direct ancestry, near as I can tell. I've done quite a bit of digging on it. It was my COVID project, and I've been chipping away at it here and there ever since. So I am fairly certain that the specifics of the family history part of it, of what I'm about to tell you, is correct. But some of the finer points might change as I do more digging. But here we go. That is Hans Herr. So I will tell you a lot about Hans Herr. So he is one of the original Mennonites that came to America. So this was what I'm going to describe is the third Mennonite colony that came to Pennsylvania. Now, most people know about William Penn. He was one of the Quakers, and he got a grant from, I believe it was King Charles II, for the land in the New World as payment for a debt owed to his family. And there's still a big Quaker presence in the state today that can be felt. Like, I even have some family members that are Quakers. So I'm somewhat familiar with their practices. I don't know as much about the Mennonites other than just being exposed to the Amish up until I did research for this. And I'm starting to learn more about it now. But basically, Hans Herr is a very interesting figure. So he was born sometime in the 1620s or 30s, and around 1710, or just prior to 1710, he meets with William Penn over in England with a few of his compatriots. He had already been a practicing Mennonite for decades at this point, along with several other families that would end up migrating to the New World. But they met with William Penn, and they bought a tract of land in today's Lancaster County that would end up being the furthest west settlement in the British Americas by the time they settled there. So this was virgin territory. And it was something that William Penn had, this will become relevant later, William Penn had made a point of acquiring all the land from the natives in Pennsylvania by free exchange and fair trade. So people might say about the other colonies, oh, didn't they just take the land from the natives by force? Not so with Pennsylvania, and definitely the case for the land that Hans Herr and his fellow Mennonites would be settling on. So yeah, now we're getting into the Mennonites, Jacob. So yeah, he has his meeting with William Penn, and then shortly after, he goes back to Switzerland or Germany. It's unclear where they were living at that point, and go via the Netherlands over to Philadelphia in 1710, and they arrive in mid-September. So keep in mind, Mid-September, Philadelphia. Maybe it's a little bit warm, but you're already starting to get cold. So by the time they make it out to Lancaster County, aside from any natives that might be out there, there's nothing there. There's no roads. Well, there might be some roads, but there's not much of anything. So
libertarian paradise.
You're just going out there and you are genuinely roughing it. So yeah, this guy he's something else, willing to risk it all, possibly being in his mid-70s with no modern medicine. Like, how do you get away with that? Yes, Hans Hoppe. Yeah, just change his name a little bit. Maybe he was the I guess he would be the 18th century Hans Hoppe. So it gets more interesting. I'll quote one source here about him arriving to the New World. Quote, and this is in reference to his wife that also came with him. Her husband, clad in the coarsest homespun clothes, his feet shod with wood, arrived in the far-off land of America after a prophecy told him that he and his people would be prosperous and happy, however poor, when arriving in this land. So there you go. Determined to make the best of their circumstances and seek religious and economic freedom in the New World. So any thoughts so far? Anything to stand out?
I only caught the tail end, so
Yeah, basically I was talking about the Mennonites and the Amish and how they purchased the land from William Penn and became the furthest west settlement in the British Americas at that point in today's Lancaster County. The towns themselves are just outside Lancaster.
It's weird to think of Lancaster as the furthest west.
Yeah, where in PA is Lancaster?
It's kind of
so
east.
it's just east of where Jacob is. Yeah, it's like about a half
an hour and a half west of Philly and about half an hour, 45 minutes east of where I live.
Yeah, so it's still in the eastern part of the state, but you're getting towards Pennsylvania at that point.
It's as far west as you can go while still being in eastern PA. Probably a good way to put it.
Okay.
That's the best way to describe it. Yeah. So it would take about an hour and a half from Philadelphia today. Back then, without good roads or any roads, it would definitely take you at least several days. And at his age, who knows?
And Lancaster is literally
where was the convention.
The
one that was like
one
in the middle of the state somewhere. The Little League World Series was there. That's it.
You think about Williamsport? That's like far north. That's like the far north central part of the state. That'd be very far from here.
So like nowhere near where we're talking about?
No.
Nowhere near it, yeah.
Okay, then all right, that's good. I don't know the geography of Pennsylvania enough to know it, but I've kind of triangulated.
Pennsylvanians don't know the geography of Pennsylvania, so you're fine.
Well, if you let's just say if you traveled a half hour south from where this was by car, you'd be in the then or future colony of Maryland.
All right. By the way, I will point out that you just used the word Pennsylvania, which that's funny and it makes sense because it's you've got Philly and Pittsburgh and then in the middle it's Kentucky. But that is kind of like a disparaging remark against probably my favorite state in the Union. I mean, it's just Northerners just kind of have this like snotty, just like disdain for the South. So they say things like Pennsylvania and it just rolls off your tongue.
I think you misunderstand. When I say Pennsylvania, I mean it affectionately because I live in
I don't think the person who invented that term thought of it affectionately.
I know they don't mean it that way, but I agree with Jacob. It's affectionate at this point.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, like I live in the part of PA that's like what people will call the part of PA that's either Alabama or Kentucky in the middle. And yeah, I mean, around here, people, it's like because I'm really close to the Mason-Dixon line, so like the heritage of your county is actually a little bit infamous. So like when the Confederate Army came through York County before it eventually ended up in Gettysburg, like the people in York like threw a party, were like celebrating them, like yay, the Confederates are here. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, they're not very good. The York County Inns were not very good Yankees. Although the
Not
small
very good Yankees,
contingency
right?
of them that were Yankees burned the Wrightsville Bridge, which barred Lee's army from going to Harrisburg, and that's actually how he ended up going the other direction, which ended him up in Gettysburg. I know a lot of
I did
local
not know
history
that.
because I'm a nerd. I'm sorry.
I
Well,
like
we'll
how
have
you
to talk
pronounce
about that another
Gettysburg.
time.
Gettysburg,
I
Gettysburg.
say Gettysburg, but Gettysburg is prettier. I like that. I think I'm gonna start pronouncing it that way
Yeah.
if I ever say it again.
Still, that is 150 years in the future from where we are.
True.
So I will go back to this since I think we're a little bit short on time. So they settled in today's Lancaster County. So the town names are it's like I don't know when the town names actually caught on, but today they're called Willow Street. That's where Hans and his family ended up settling. And then later immigrants that would arrive and be part of that same colony would end up founding. Well, they had come from France. That's another story. But we're also Protestants. They founded the town of Strasbourg. Locals might know it as famous for the Strasbourg Railroad and has the I think it's like the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum, which is really good for trade enthusiasts. But Strasbourg is named after Strasbourg in France. So that's the source of those town names. But back to this main story. So because Penn had purchased the land from the local Susquehannock natives, those were the natives that lived in the area, he also guaranteed them the promise of protection and friendship. So this ensured that peaceful relations would be maintained, not just with the natives and with Penn, but also with the natives and the Mennonites that would come to live there. And when the Mennonites did build their new settlement, it ended up being built just 5 miles east of a native village known as Conestoga Indian Town. That was the actual name of it, which was populated by Susquehannocks. And that community itself of the natives was made up of those fleeing war and persecution, mainly skirmishes with the French and disease that had greatly reduced their population. So in that sense, it really is two immigrant communities that had, at least in part, been fleeing persecution and now found themselves within a few miles of each other, cooperating and trading to survive, at least early on. Because the Mennonites, they had nothing when they arrived. They just showed up and it was winter, so they didn't have a chance to grow anything. So they received aid from the Susquehannocks to survive their first winter. The natives themselves were described as resolutely peaceful. And the Mennonites, for their part, were industrious, honest, and hardworking. That's from the descriptions I've seen. William Penn himself, I think you'll find this entertaining. He described them as a sober people who will neither swear nor fight. In other words, the opposite of Jacob.
Wow.
James had a little dig. James had a little dig at you. I had to fit something in there too.
Yeah, of course. You know, we got to give and get.
Okay, so by 1719, Hans's son Christian Herr completed their permanent sandstone home. So that is what I'm going to show you next. This is a painting by Andrew Wyeth. Are either of you familiar with him? No, he is a fairly well-known American artist from the middle of the 20th century. But he had a distant family connection to the Herrs, as I do, although his is by marriage. So he ended up coming to the house much later on because it's still there and was struck by its beauty. So he ended up doing this painting of it. But so Christian Herr completed their permanent sandstone home, and It was a true sign that
lines.
yes, and put up electrical lines. They were the Mennonites were not only industrious; they were way ahead of their time. Forget the fact that some of them became Amish. Yeah, but anyway, it was a true sign that they had made a home for themselves in the New World. And then in later years, according to family stories, the Susquehannocks would come by their home on cold nights and sleep at their hearth, warmed by their roaring fire, just as you can see here. So that this painting depicts Christian Herr with presumably his wife at the door, welcoming visiting Susquehannock natives into their house. So I've seen that painting around on the internet too. It was I believe there was some sort of article written about it in like roughly the middle of the 20th century about this whole episode, and it featured this painting in there. So far so good.
One of the school districts in York, by the way, is named Susquehannock.
That would make sense because it was named after the Susquehanna River, where they had originally lived before they were forced to flee by the French.
Yeah.
So, curse those French.
Something universal agreed upon. It's like we can all agree. Screw the French, right? I shouldn't say that. I should say I'm sorry. I have like one devoted listener to my show from France. His name is Fred. So no offense, Fred. I'm sorry. You're the one good Frenchman.
I shouldn't be too hard on the French either, because not only is my brother-in-law French, but I recently found out through the French immigrant side of the family that I mentioned a minute ago that I'm also related to the person who lived back, I forget his name off the top of my head, but it was back in the 16th century who did the first French translation of the Bible. So that's another thing that's worth talking about later on.
I'll stop derailing your show so you can get back to the slideshow.
Yeah, I'll finish up because the story has a little bit left. So basically, anyone who has been to Pennsylvania or this general area knows that if you go to a park where people haven't lived, you'll see that. I mean, we're not talking like redwoods here, but there's still very large trees all over the place. Like the whole land was just covered in deciduous forest before people came and started clearing the land, and the Mennonite farmers did that. They started clearing the land, and they were smart enough to recognize that the fact that there were these big trees there was a sign that it was very fertile farmland. 100 years later, an English visitor called the area the finest district of land in Pennsylvania. In fact, the Mennonites found life so idyllic here that they sent representatives back to Europe in order to enlist them to join. And the colony quickly grew with the influx of other families. So it was very prosperous, and they were among the most economically successful groups in Pennsylvania, definitely outside of Philadelphia. They did very well for themselves. So, of course, they were operating I mean, there was still a colonial government, but they weren't doing a whole lot, and allowed them to live in peace with the natives as they had for some time. But this all changed around the 1750s and the 1760s. I was very disappointed to learn that Benjamin Franklin was involved in this too. That added added more frustration to reading about this. The time of harmonious relations with the natives would end with the start of the French and Indian War. The previously peace-leaning Quaker-dominated Pennsylvania legislature was replaced by war hawks, and by the end of the conflict at the French and Indian War, the natives in the area were compelled to move westward. So basically, I don't know if he led it, but he was at least a part of it. Benjamin Franklin brought in some war hawks to the Pennsylvania legislature and just did not want to, be friendly with the natives and make deals with them anymore. He was just like, "You're gone." So that ended the era of cooperation that the Mennonites had with the natives. So I'll wrap it up by saying the the home that I described earlier, now known as the Hans Herr House, still stands and is now one of the oldest houses in the country. It's a lasting legacy to the earliest settlement of the Lancaster County by the industrious Mennonites and their peaceful, mutually beneficial relationships with the natives. So you can think of it as Pennsylvania's own Thanksgiving story. And for the sake of the post and to relate it to today's current events, I ended it by saying, if two such distinct groups can work together to forge better lives for themselves, it should serve as a lesson to all that peaceful relations are possible despite surface level differences, and that a state of peace should be pursued wherever possible as a matter of course. And this is part of what will be going out on the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania page as our Thanksgiving message. So that is the end of my part of the story.
I like the pictures.
I like how Calvin came 10 times more prepared than you and I did to talk about his content.
I've also been doing research, at least in part, for like 3 years, 4 years.
That helps.
So I had a bit of an edge.
I listened to a couple of podcasts, listened to or read a few articles, and chatted with GPT-4 to fill in some of the gaps. Which
how is ChatGPT? Completely off topic. How is GPT-4 worth it? The versus 3?
Dude, Jacob, I use GPT-4 so freaking often. Like, it's worth it for me, but I also have really weird curiosities that, like, like it's, I mean, stuff like this is certainly, worth talking to GPT about, but like, I have really recently like gotten into watching 80s movies. And so I'm like, hey, here's a list of movies that I really like, and I give it Breakfast Club and Say Anything and whatever else. Give me a list of like 10 movies that I probably never heard of that are on streaming services. And it'll spit out a list of 10 freaking
that's
80s
awesome.
movies that are on Amazon Prime or whatever that I can go and just watch. It's so great. Like and I know like our Orthodox friends call it a demon and like think that I'm probably inviting Satan into my heart to be my personal Lord and Savior or whatever. But man, I get why people sell their souls if that's the case. It's game changing, man. I'm not kidding. Not to curse your Christian podcast or anything, but man,
James is happy with the bread and circus as long as it's spewing out good movies for him to watch.
Yeah, exactly. I get my little dopamine, and that's pretty much it. I'm good to go.
Oh gosh,
I used to spend so much time on social media posts before that helped me do some long form posts, while in some cases spending hardly any time on it. So it definitely helps.
Yeah, I've been using it for a little bit for just not even. Sometimes it's just like I need help with like creative generation of content. I'll be like, okay, well, I'll go like, here's the premise of my podcast. Give me some topics to talk about, or here's the premise of my Twitter profile. Give me some content to like form some posts out of. Because sometimes it depends on the day. Sometimes it's like easy to ride the wave of what people are talking about and things like that. And some days it's like I got nothing. I got writer's block, and I use ChatGPT to kind of like, as a springboard to.
I will say that if you're using it. I will say that if you're using it for stuff like that, upgrading is probably worth it. ChatGPT-4 or just GPT-4 is a lot more clever than 3.5. It'll give you funnier tweets. Like, not to say that you should just copy and paste your tweets from your ChatGPT, but it'll give you better tweets. It gives you better outlines for interviews and things like that.
It would probably be a better sparring partner too, because I've done 2 episodes where I debate against it. And so if I'm going to go back to that format, I probably it'd be worth it to do it against 4, because it's I don't want to be accused of going against the inferior, the low IQ AI.
Debating ChatGPT, I never thought of that.
Oh no, it is. There's a huge field of that. Like some of my Christian apologetics podcasters that I listened to did that. Like they were like trying to give the ChatGPT all these like proofs for the existence of God, and trying to be like, okay, just prove this proof, and then like get into like this giant meta. You can also, what's really funny for just fun, you can be like, hey, write an argument against like X in the style of like you can just pick a random person, like write it like Jordan Peterson, or write it in the style of like I don't know, you just pick any person, it'll write it in like that kind of mimic the sort of like vernacular of the person that you pick out. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. So
It's pretty cool.
well, we should probably try to make some closing statements here. I feel like, I mean, this was like we said, this was intendedly to be pretty casual, but I don't know. I think the general theme from what you and I talked about, James, and then what Calvin talked about is that it's possible to use religion and the idea of religious freedom towards decentralization and towards having peaceful relationships with your neighbors. And then we also see how it can go the complete opposite direction if if you let your religious zeal become something that drives you to I don't know, it's hard for me to even label it that way, because I just don't I don't see where in Christianity people come up with this conclusion that we need to, you know, use the power of the civil magistrate to go and you know, proselytize people not only into believe, you know, like you must profess to be Christian, but then like, you know, all these social taboos, all these particular dogmas and practices and some of them that like I don't even necessarily find to be that bad or objectionable if they're done voluntarily. But when they're done in the other way, I'm like, okay, like did Jesus do like Jesus lived completely opposite of that. He didn't walk around you know, finger wagging people to you know, become more like the Pharisees and engage in all these you know, religious idiosyncrasies, and you know, trying to outperform one another and trying to you know, use social. I mean, I believe in the use for social shaming in some aspects, but you know, like I loved what Dave Smith was talking about on Tim Pool the other night. He was like, social shaming is the ultimate response to people like Hillary Clinton and George Bush and neocons and things like that. Like that's what social shaming should be for. It's like you're a warmonger. You lied and manipulated into you know, spending billions of dollars to kill a bunch of people overseas. It's like, yeah, you should probably have a social cost for that. And I'm definitely fine with that. But you know, exacting social pressure for like you know, the meme we always talk about when you come on the show is, you believe the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son and not just the Father? Like, you know, let's go to war. Yeah, I don't know. Something there seems to be amiss. But I don't know. That's my closing thoughts. Calvin, James, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, so I have one more serious note and then one more lighthearted note. So on a more serious note, yeah, just to emphasize what I said at the end of my part of the episode. Yeah, there's, you know, I hope that we've shown that it's not just the case, you know, that the Pilgrims are able to get along with the natives and, you know, have their relations be peaceful and everything, but there's many other cases of that as well. Pennsylvania is filled with them, not just this one. And ultimately, it wasn't even, you know, a change in circumstances or too many colonists coming in or anything that, you know, ultimately derailed the relationship between the natives and the colonists. It was a change in government and something similar to, you know, today's war hawks coming into their Congress and enacting a change in policy that led to war and you know, expulsions thereafter that just ruined any chance for peaceful relations that they might have had going forward after that time. So, but if anything, the fact that they were able to show each other, you know, such not just, you know, fair and free trade during their interactions, but they were just willing to help each other for its own sake, you know, with the natives, giving them food and helping them survive in the first few seasons, followed by, you know, the hers, essentially welcoming them into their home and having them. And I've been inside the house. It's, you know, it's fairly sizable for the time, but it's not that big. So, you know, if you had them sleeping by the fireplace on the first floor or in the upper floor, you know, it's noticeable. It's not like huge. It's not a huge house. So, you know, it was a sacrifice on their part if they had like, you know, one native stay over for the night, let alone 5. So, you know,
Yeah.
I'm sure it was meaningful for the
Not,
natives to have these friends nearby.
not to mention, and we didn't get into this, I think, too much, but like Pennsylvania and like William Penn, what he constructed was, in a lot of ways, people say it was a kind of like an anarchist experiment because there wasn't really direct taxation or anything like that. So there's like a Mises article about it. So might put that in
Right.
the comment. I mean the episode description because it's kind of relevant too. James, give us the last.
I did have my more lighthearted note.
What's your lighthearted note?
Yeah. So my lighthearted note is if you've ever had Hers brand snacks, that's the same family. So now every time you have, you know, Hers potato chips or pretzels or anything like that, I want you to think about these lessons that we've discussed here today. Every time from now on, it's going to be stuck in your head.
So
Nice.
Hers potato chips and Amish furniture. Those are my Mennonite.
Yeah, that her, those Hers are the descendants of Hans Her and his clan.
All right, James, make one more shot at the Yankees here before we hop off.
You know, I'm not going to do that. I will. I'll say I think that everyone needs to be reading Brian McClanahan and Hans Hermann Hoppe, 2 names that we brought up today. But they're people that libertarians and non-libertarians alike, anybody who is broadly speaking on the right, should be reading Southern historians and anarcho-capitalist philosophers and economists, and that's just kind of where I'm at. Even if I'm not in the South and I'm not an anarcho-capitalist at this point, those are the
Minnesotan says the South will rise again.
I'll settle for Tex. I'll settle for Texit.
There we go.
I want to say, so Jacob, you asked earlier, like, what is it that, you know, why is it that we can derive decentralization and centralization from religion? And I think that, well, it's not the end all be all explanation for this, but it is an explanation. If you look at the Great Commission, where Jesus tells the 11 assembled apostles to go out and make disciples of all nations, he uses the word there, at least in the original Greek, is ethnos. It refers to like a people. It refers to a culture, a tribe, an ethnicity, you know, whatever have you. At some point between the Great Commission and Plymouth Rock, the word nation came to mean the collection of people underneath a government, a centralized government. And I think that's where we get it twisted, because the United States, it certainly wasn't a nation in the 1600s, and I would maintain that it never was a nation. You know, when Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address and said that our founders brought forth to this continent a new nation, he wasn't being completely novel. Like the United States had always been referred to as a nation, but it was never treated like one. It was never treated like a centralized thing. You know, like a single unit. It's always been understood to be a union of free and independent states, so to speak. And so, and you know, I mean, it even goes to for me, it goes so far as to like, I would if I had my dictator hat on, I would change the name of the Libertarian National Committee and just call it like the Libertarian Board of Directors or something. Just eradicate the word nation from our vocabularies when we're referring to the United States, because we're not a nation. And when the Yankees decided that they were going to go make disciples of this nation, the nation that had, you know, they had Protestant Christians all over the South, and Jewish people and Catholics too. But it became incumbent upon these people when they were out spreading their gospel, that they had to spread their gospel. And cultures are different, man. It's just what it is. You know, we're way too big to be treated like a nation. So that's my take. That's what I want to leave the audience with, I guess, is quit thinking of America as a nation. Can I plug in now, or are we gonna do that after this?
No, I think that's a great way to end it. Is and we can do plugs here quick then at the end. But yeah, I think I mean, some people, and this isn't even an opinion that everyone at LCI agrees with. I'm probably the most Hoppian person at LCI, and it's Hoppian, but it's also, I don't know, like sometimes it's kind of like the one consistent thread from my days as a lefty is that I've just always been like, don't get me wrong, there are parts about the American history and ethos and experiment that, like, in isolation, I can appreciate, but I've just never bought into American exceptionalism or this idea of like America like has to be a thing or even is a thing. Like, is it a thing or is it just a bunch of propaganda of a bunch of different people in different parts of a continent? And it's like this forced semi-secular, semi-religious, fabricated civic religion that's like this, it's almost like a Frankenstein monster of like some parts of Christianity and some parts of the Enlightenment and then a bunch of other stuff mixed in. And I don't know, I don't buy into it, and I don't know. So I don't know. That's why I like what you said there. I kind of think the quicker we abandon the idea of America, maybe the the better off we'll be. I mean, listen, the world existed for thousands of years without an America. It's not, it's not. And sorry to offend any Mormons out there listening, but there's nothing special about America in the Bible. So Mormon religion notwithstanding. Anyway, let's give some any plugs we want to give before we go. I mean, obviously, for me, it's easy. Biblical Anarchy on Twitter and Biblical Anarchy Podcast. Calvin and James, go ahead and plug anything you want to plug before we hop off.
Yeah, so if you want to follow what I'm working on, well, you can follow what's in the video link here. If you're watching the video, it's at LP Mises Caucus PA. So all the projects we're working on, we got a lot of coalition projects coming up soon, like Rage Against the War Machine is going to be doing another event in February. Details forthcoming, so stay tuned for that. And there's some other projects we'll be working on as well, like we'll be doing more episodes of the Take Human Action podcast, and I'll continue to put out some content for the LPPA social media pages, so follow them again at lppa.org. And that's it for me, James.
Okay, yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter, James LJ. Hit me up on Substack, blackbird.substack.com. I half-ass kind of think I'm going to start writing again. Probably won't kick the podcast back off for a while, but I do have lots of thoughts that I want to put down on paper. So there's that. Don't subscribe to the paid option on Substack. If you want to send me money, go to lpmn.org and make a donation. It's tax deductible. We're a political party. If you're in Minnesota, you can get $50 back from the state for making political donations. So that's something to think about. I'm trying to put on the best convention the libertarian world has ever seen, and I'm trying to do it on a budget. So the more money I get, the better. That's lpmn.org, and hit that donate button. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody who listened in. And we'll close out with JC's comment. Happy Thanksgiving, y'all. Take it easy.
Happy
and
Thanksgiving.
We'll talk to you again soon. Yeah.
Gobble, gobble.